I call Marja Lubeck.
I'm raising to take this call on the Education, Tertiary Education and Other Matters Amendment Bill. Yes, I agree with the previous speakers that this bill started its life as a government bill under the 51st government, but the 52nd government definitely has made significant improvements to it and made it a lot better. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. First of all, I want to mention that in general, this bill has quite a few aspects to it that show a strengthening of the tertiary education system by addressing accountability in the system and increasing student protection. Something that this bill is adding as an improvement is that it tidies up a loophole with regard to falsely awarding credits on a student's record of achievement. Now, that issue a while ago received quite a bit of publicity when the International Academy of New Zealand was closed. Students were not receiving correct assessments of their studies. So while it was already an offence to issue false qualifications, there was a loophole with regard to falsifying credits or marks for students' assignments. So as my colleague Joe Luxon mentioned before, the increases to the penalty for falsification on student records has increased significantly from 10,000 to 50,000. So that makes it comparable to similar offences. But what the increase also does, it increases the timeline that this offence can be prosecuted, and it extends it from 1 to 5 years. That's important because it can actually take up to 4 years before reviews or routine checks show up that there has been an offence. So as a result of this change, NZQA can prosecute persons who falsify components of a qualification, and when they do that, they undermine the confidence that the public can have in the integrity of our NZQA system. Now, as I said before, I'd like to talk a little bit about the importance of the deletion of some of these proposed clauses. Because, in fact, the changes that this government has made to this bill go to the core of how we are fundamentally different. This government bill started out as a bill that puts profit first. We put people first. So this is not about creating a level playing field, as the Honourable Nikki Kay mentioned. And unlike the member Tim McIndoe, this is not about punishment of private providers. I'm not sure, actually, if the Honourable Member Tim McIndoe was part of the previous Select Committee or not, but I know that the previous Minister, Honourable Nikki Kay, should be aware of the thousands of submissions that were put forward to that particular Select Committee at the time. Vast majority, as my colleague Jamie Strange has pointed out, not supporting that change at all. What the provisions proposed by the previous government would have done is they would have provided the same funding range across the board, whether that education provider was a public or a private entity. Now, that's not right. As I said before, during the Select Committee, there was an overwhelming amount of submitters pointing out that public money should not be spent on what is a private business. The majority of submitters were opposed to the clauses that would put in a law that public and private providers should receive the same rate of funding. The majority of submitters were clear on the fact that they saw public providers committed to the communities they serve and they work in, and that legislation to provide private for-profit providers with the same funding would ultimately undermine these public institutions. It was submitted that using public funding to subsidise for-profit providers would create unacceptable competition for public providers. And the main focus should not be on what the economic return will be. And again, that is where we are so fundamentally different from the other side of this House. People first. As private training establishments are not accountable to the government for the quality of programs they teach, it would give them an unfair advantage if they had the same funding, because they could cherry-pick the courses that would give them the greatest return on investment, rather than putting the focus, as public institutions do, on what is best for the community. So really, it would have been going as far away as we can think of a level playing field. So what this new bill has done from this government is has removed those clauses, and it left the situation to be determined as it is now in funding policy. What we also have deleted, listening to the thousands of submitters, is the proposal to change the name of private training provider to independent tertiary provider. There were over 1,900 people that actually, people and institutions that were submitting on this point to the Select Committee. Every single one opposed the change. There was not one person or institution that supported it. Makes you kind of think that the previous government was kind of out of touch with the people. It was widely felt that the word independent would imply public institutions were not independent, and that both the terms public and private education are used all over the world, are well recognized everywhere, as well as here in New Zealand, and there's absolutely no confusion that would have warranted a change in law to somehow tidy that up. This version of the bill also removed the provision for councils to discuss topics by email, and eventually, after their emails, make decisions by email. That would have had the effect that council meetings would not be open to the public, which is against the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act. This particular act stipulates that the very important requirement of the need for public access to meetings. So this bill has very good tidy-ups, and it's closing the loopholes that pose a significant risk to our education system. Now, we talked about the over 2,000 submissions. There's also one that was quite significant from the Otago Uni Students Association. It talks again about the the wording of independent, and it states that they don't support the amendment to the bill. We understand the wide-ranging nature of the PTSE sector. However, we believe the change to independent tertiary establishment may in fact obscure the true nature of these organizations in providing a return to shareholders. We believe it is important to be able to clearly distinguish between public and private tertiary education provider. We believe this would serve students in better understanding the nature of their training providers. The same Otago Uni Students Association also wrote a very good paragraph on the removal of Section 159NA, the equal funding for private training providers and public institutions. And it states, the public tertiary education providers have an important responsibility to society. They have a duty to education, those of any background, to protect intellectual freedom and provide quality research that will take this country forward. Private providers, however, are not required or held accountable to be of any service to society. They can, if they please, serve only their shareholders in increasing wealth. This duty to increase shareholders' wealth can also leave these private education providers cherry-picking the courses to provide the greatest return on investment instead of focusing on the greater good for the community. Private education providers can also be motivated by increasing shareholders' wealth to shift away from communities that need education providers into larger populated areas in an attempt to increase market share. For these reasons, the OUSA strongly opposes equal funding for these private training providers. And that actually puts it really eloquently, the fact that we have been talking about not creating a level playing field at all, but in fairness actually creating a very unlevel playing field by having unfair competition and giving private providers a huge advantage to use the funding the way they see fit, and that is taking money out of the taxpayers' pockets. So coming to the end of my spiel, I also would like to thank the members of the previous Select Committee, the Education and Science Select Committee, for the work they did when they passed it on to us, the Education and Workforce Select Committee, and we enjoyed making some changes to it, making it a more enjoyable bill, thereby now supporting it and commending it to the House. Thank you.
I call Denise Lee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm taking a call on this bill here tonight, this afternoon, and happy to take a call on a second reading, my first to do so since becoming an MP. And I have picked up on a linkage between the three